Fantastic. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to night 3 of 4 of Nonprofit Expert Week. I am Dr. Tamara W, and I am so excited that you have joined me for another conversation that I believe is going to be very impactful. This week, I'm hosting these chats as I count down to the release of my book, Leading for Good. And I designed this series to be a resource for nonprofit leaders. And so tonight, I'm joined by Kathryn Thompson, who serves as the development director for the Partnership for Housing Affordability in Richmond, Virginia. And she had a very extensive bio, and so I'll share a little bit about her. With over a decade of experience in nonprofit leadership, Kathryn has developed and executed strategic growth initiatives across community and government agencies. As the co founder and former executive director of Southside Transformation Opportunities for Residents and Youth, she launched impactful programs addressing youth development and education and expanded the organization's reach, increasing its budget to over $100,000 within 3 years. She managed the resident services departments for Petersburg and Hopewell housing authorities, developing community partnerships to administer programs and services to public housing residents. Hopewell was awarded its first family self sufficiency grant under her direction. Wow. Her leadership and community engagement continued at CultureWorks, where she went on to create initiatives to support artists of color and plan regional art events such as Arttober, Virginia. Kathryn is a dynamic storyteller, both in her role as development director and other areas, which is why I know she's going to be perfect for this conversation. So, welcome, Kathryn. How are you this evening?
I'm great. How are you, Tamara?
I am doing fantastic. So, to kick us off, share a little bit about you and what led to your work in nonprofits.
I kind of ended up in the nonprofit sector in a roundabout way. When I was in college studying public relations, I interned with a transitional housing homeless organization. So I was like, oh, I want to do fundraising. And that did not work out at all. I ended up in corporate underwriting title insurance, closing residential loans, just doing tons of corporate things, and had really gotten away from ever achieving my nonprofit dreams.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and then someone that I was very close to called. They were working at the Petersburg Housing Authority, and she said, "Can you come down to Petersburg and do resident services?" And I was like, "Well, what exactly is that? I don't know what that is." And she said, "I don't really know either. Just please don't make me look bad." I said, "Okay." So I go to Petersburg to work at the housing authority, which I go from, the corporate environment into public housing. So this is a big shift.
Yeah.
It was a lot to take on. So when I got to Petersburg, none of the programs were set up. There was no grant funding. There were no partners. I had to build everything. And I pretty much did it by myself. I joined coalitions that the housing authority needed to be a part of, and kind of really integrated the housing authority into the Petersburg community overall. So was able to form some really good relationships there. And I went to a housing conference, and the director of the Petersburg Housing Authority kind of introduced me to the director of the Hopewell Housing Authority, and he said, "Let's take a walk." I said, "Okay." He said, "Can you do for us what you did for them?" And
I
we'll give
love it.
you back. I was like, "Yeah, probably."
I love it.
um, so I went to work for them as their resident services manager. And again, I had to build everything from scratch. But I did. Um, we started out with an intern, Terrence, whom I love dearly, was from Virginia State, and he was also majoring in public relations. So I got him, to help with social media, and we were uh, in the programs actually executing them with the youth. So we had to like do our regular jobs and then go work
Yeah.
for the youth. So we were extremely busy. And we just started building the program, and then the director was like, "We've never had a family self-sufficiency grant." So I worked on that, and it was awarded. It was awarded for quite a few years, so that equaled, hundreds of thousands of dollars for the agency. We graduated a few homeowners from that program. Our little Easter egg hunt started in one community and became a citywide Easter egg hunt, like by year two, I believe, because Tamara
Yeah.
did such a great job with that. And so I went to the allergist with my son one day, and there was a program officer from one of the government funding agencies there. And I'm just making her laugh with my personal stories. And she said, "Well, apply for this capacity building funding that we have." So that was a 3 year, $60,000 grant. They were great. They worked with us, they helped edit it. They really wanted us to be successful. So with that grant, I created a strategic plan for the housing authority. Steve told me to set up Story, which was the nonprofit, and then we did a strategic plan for Story. So by about month 9, I'm like very overwhelmed. I'd never done this before, and I was asking if we could give the money back because it was so much work.
Yeah.
But he was like, "No." And then he appointed me to run Story since I created it. And I did that for 8 years. And while doing that, I took a screenwriting class during COVID and actually ended up making a short film. And so my writing career started to go faster than what I expected. So I couldn't write and keep overseeing Stories. So I
Right.
passed the baton.
So you talked about a few different funding opportunities. For someone who is watching and maybe leading a nonprofit or supporting one, if you had to pick two or three kind of focus areas, what makes a grant application stand out to a potential funder?
Um, so I would say following their grant guidelines. You're always going to want to make sure that you have SMART goals and objectives. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound, and then a sustainability plan.
Mm,
They're going to be interested: if we don't give you this money next year, how are you going to make up this loss? So those would be my top 3 things.
I love that. For those of you that are just joining, welcome. I'm Dr. Tamara W. I'm joined here by our grants expert, Kathryn Thompson. She's sharing around tips and recommendations as far as grant writing. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will address them towards the end of our conversation. So you shared three things that make a great grant. What are the top mistakes that people make when it comes to seeking a grant?
So I think if you submit an unsolicited proposal to a funder that only accepts solicited proposal,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big no. You probably can't come back from that. Not following submission guidelines, like lots of times there'll be a word count, and if they're online and like a grant system, then you absolutely can't go over the word count. But some foundations may not have that up and running yet. Um, and then I think budget mistakes would be my third pick. You want to make sure that your budget lines up, and accounting math can be a nightmare for creatives, especially. So have a second pair of eyes, check your budget, make sure it's on point.
No, I think that's a great point too. And know where your kind of like weaknesses are because even if you get the grant, they will likely expect some type of report on the back end of
Yes.
the finances and what was done. And so usually, if you find yourself struggling at the beginning, at the application phase to get them the numbers they need, you want to make sure that, especially if you get the grant, you have supports in place, whether it's a CPA or a bookkeeper, whoever that is next, that is with your organization and is going to help you accurately track what is spent on that grant and
Yes.
then give you an accurate report of be able to give to the funder of how you utilize that money.
Yes, grants are like investments. So, of course, they're going to want return on their investment. And that comes through your goals and objectives. And if they give you 12 months to spend all the money, then be responsible and spend all the money in the 12-month period that they gave you.
I love it. You become your own like CEO of the grant.
Yep. Yep.
So you mentioned people applying for grants that are not open, in terms of like, I've seen quite a few that say we only open it up to specific people or we don't accept unsolicited grants. How can people make connections? Because it's not like, we want people to be able just to show up and hand you a check or an application. But
Mhm.
if you have someone maybe that's newer and isn't familiar, what can they do to maybe build relationships with funders to both find out? And then once they've applied, is there a way for them to be able to keep that relationship open as they're going through the submission process?
Sure. So if it's a foundation, you're going to want to locate the program officer and make your connection there. Say, hey, we align with your funding goals. I'd like to talk to you about this program, or, we'd like to start this initiative. Can I schedule a meeting with you? Then prepare some materials that they can look over. And that's normally how I approach foundations. For my organization specifically, we did a corporate roundtable last summer where we invited all of the corporate community relations staff to a luncheon. And we did a presentation about what we were working on, how they could be, and our mission is affordable housing policy. How they could become involved. And then we have an annual event every January called the State of Housing. So we followed that up with an actual document that we premiered at the State of Housing event this past January. And then, of course, our corporate sponsors were there. So we've got a lot of positive feedback about the outline that we've made, how corporations can support affordable housing in the region and get more involved. They've been so excited about that document. So think of creative ways where you can, let them know, hey, we need a board member, or hey, can you sponsor our event, or hey, can you give us a grant to this program? Because there's different things that corporations can do. Pro bono work is another. We got a pro pro bono grant from Cap One to help us with some data projects. So we're really
Oh,
excited about that.
that's a good point.
Yeah, because we do a lot of research. So I would say, assess where your needs are, and then see who best could fit those, and either find the program officer that's on the funder side or the community relations person that's on the corporate side.
Great point. So, say someone is really excited, they apply for a grant, they don't get it. The world is over. I didn't get the grant. There's nothing I can do. Is there anything that you would suggest, from a grant writing perspective or even a relationship building perspective, for that person that gets rejected, for kind of what they can do next?
Don't take it personal. Everyone gets rejected at some point.
Yes.
If you have a close connection to that program officer, see if they will give you feedback on how you can improve your application for the next cycle. If you have time, would be probably my primary response. And then many people that start nonprofits think, oh, I've got my nonprofit paperwork, I can start getting grants out the gate, but that's not the case.
Yes. No.
Only foundations will ask you to be operational for 3 years. So are you going to fund yourself for 3 years, or do you have the individual donor support to fund yourself for 3 years? I was able to get grants out of the gate with Story because I was already getting grant funding under the Housing Authority, and we just pulled everything out from under there and put it under Story and let the nonprofit take over all of the programming for the residents. So that was how I was able to do that. They already knew my work. But if a funder doesn't know your work, it's like a minimum 3-year requirement. Plus, the nonprofit market is saturated with nonprofits. So, what makes you stand out? Like, why should they be giving you grant money versus an organization who's already been operating for 10 years or, whatever, is what I would say.
Several great tips here. If you're watching, I want to underscore what Kathryn has shared. Understand that there are, in many communities, there can be 10 to 15 other organizations working in the same area as you,
Mhm.
serving a similar population. So don't let a rejection kind of steer you away completely from a grant opportunity or any funder. Consistency is key, which is why, she mentioned operating for 3 years to kind of have that proof before you can get some of these grants. And so, really ask yourself how you can go about doing the work and getting the results and getting those stories and that data so that you can position yourself well for some funding. So it is hard not to take it personal. I have applied for so many grants and they still sting if they don't come through because they take time, they take effort,
Yes,
they take energy. If you've built relationships, you've invested, and so completely understand, but the key is to keep trying and keep showing up.
yes.
Okay. Are there any emerging trends around grant writing that you've seen, whether it's like within the process of grant writing or even in finding grants? Any trends that you see popping up right now?
Well, of course, the federal grants are, we don't know what's going to happen like
Yeah.
minute to minute right there. So I was on LinkedIn today and saw, for example, the MacArthur Foundation had posted that due to the federal grant crisis that is occurring, if you will, their foundation was going to increase their annual funding. So you'll probably see more private foundations do that so that the federal funding gaps can, be somewhat filled. And I would say definitely you're going to want to make sure that you have stronger collaboration and partnerships because if there's less funding, you're going to need much stronger grant applications than
Yes.
ever before. And then I would say um, this goes back to like word count. Make sure that your language is very concise, very to the point in your applications. And then my last thing would be like using AI, not to write your grants, because I have been in meetings where the grant reviewers are like, we can tell if you use AI to write the whole thing. But kind of like for grant time management, you may use it for help with editing, but it doesn't have the intuition of a person, So
Yes.
you're still going to need to write it yourself. But it's good to like bounce around ideas, edit. Hey, how can I reword this and phrase it better? So things like that, I think.
I completely agree with the private foundations and kind of like additional entities in terms of funding.
Mhm.
That's one conversation I've been having with people who kind of get into the space where they're feeling really discouraged and bummed out right now,
Mhm.
or who planned programs this year that they thought they were going to have money for, and now they don't anymore. And so, yes, I am in the book, in the chapter around donor relationships, as well as I think the chapter around storytelling. I highlight the importance of diversifying your revenue streams.
Yes.
And you want to try to do that. And grant writing is, of course, one of the ways that I encourage a lot of my clients to do it, not just to rely on a major individual donor, not just to rely on a heavy state or federal fund, not to rely solely on a business, but to really try and look at how are you balanced
Exactly.
across your different revenue sources.
Yes.
And the same is with grant writing. And I also encourage you too, if you're leading and you're fundraising right now, don't put all of your money in grant writing. Try to still diversify what you're doing. Never put all of your eggs in one basket, especially when it comes to financial sustainability of your nonprofit.
Right. Our executive director gets invited to speak a lot of places, so earned revenue is another source. So I'm asking him, I'm like, okay, how much are we charging for Unity? Oh, I know he's probably like, good Lord. But, you're right. You have to have these diverse streams of income to sustain your organization. So, and then we had looked at putting like excess revenue into a mutual fund or something like that. So I know that's something
Yeah,
that is also being looked at. But individual donors are key, and they may not be major donors. Maybe they're giving you $100 a year or whatever, but that's all unrestricted money, and that is extremely important.
absolutely. And you even added in with the mutual fund and kind of like that investing piece.
Mhm.
Also, something I recommend if you're a nonprofit leader, then that's definitely a conversation you want to have with your board to develop a policy for investing. But for sure, I think that is another area that's not as talked about, as well as the earned income. A lot of nonprofits do have potential opportunities where they could have a revenue stream that can also serve as another way to kind of maintain that sustainability. So I appreciate that perspective.
Yes.
All right, we're heading into our last question. So if you have questions for our expert around grants, please leave them in the comments and I will make sure to share them. Um, can you share either from your own grant or a grant that maybe you worked on, a favorite success story?
Yes, the one that changed my little life. It's my favorite story. Um, so, as I mentioned, I took a screenwriting class at the Visual Arts Center. I'm a member here in 2020, and everyone loved my little short screenplay. It was my first time trying that genre of writing, and the teacher said, "Kathryn, if you find 5,000, I'll help you make this film." So I just put that to the back of my mind. And then January of the next year came, and I called my program officer at the Virginia Commission of the Arts, and we share the same name. And I said, "Can you give me money as an individual artist to help me make my first short film?" So she said, "We don't fund individual artists, but I do fund organizations, and I know your work under Story. Can we create this program under Story?" So I was like, "Sure." So we spent an hour on the phone brainstorming, and I'm listening to what she wants me to do. And I'm like, "Great, you got it." So by the end of the conversation, I'm like, "Okay, we can call this impacting health outcomes through storytelling." So I tied my filmmaking to social determinants of health for Black women and families in public housing. And she was like, "Run with it." And then out of the clear blue sky, I always believed in giving children in public housing access to arts opportunities. And I had been looking for years for a Bank of America representative to get creative and cultural arts funding. They sent me an invitation to apply. So there goes that,
Wow.
unsolicited versus
Yeah.
proposal. I got an email. I didn't even know where, who it came from. It was kind of like from a general email. "Here's your invitation code." So I applied for 25,000 and was given 15. And then I'm pretty good friends with a program officer at a local foundation here. And I called him and I said, "Okay, I have this much money. I think I still need a little more." So he found me an anonymous donor that gave me an extra $10,000. So I had $30,000 to make a short film, to do a workshop with Black women in public housing on how relationship choices affect not only their lives but their children's lives, and look at that from a generational perspective. And I put together a panel of women. We had a lunch for them. It was really, really great. And then I did workshops with the kids. I had a friend that was a music producer, so they learned how to make, the music for a short film. They made two pieces of music. Then we also talked to them about healthy relationships and bullying. So we brought it down to their level. That was a multi-week program too. And then my film debuted here in the Africana Film Festival. Everyone's like, "Oh, you did such a great job." But I shipped it out to other film festivals because I was like, "You guys all know me." Um, and that accepted
Got to
into,
get another opinion.
yeah, San Diego Black Film Festival and the SE Manley Short Showcase out in LA. So I was like, they don't know me from anywhere. So I did do pretty good. I went to the festival in LA and got to meet the staff there, and they told me they had 1,100 films submitted from around the world. And so I was like so excited my film got chosen for that. And then after that, I landed a fellowship with Cadence Pipeline fellowship program. So I was in that for a year, and I've written another short film that I'm hoping to make. And I also got an individual grant from Culture Works to do
Oh,
a film
nice.
projects before I started working there. I had to give up that privilege when I started working there, but so that is my biggest success story. You just never know what can happen if you form these relationships and you meet, your reports on time and they're outstanding reports and people know
Yeah,
you're like they will fund you.
I love that story. And you mentioned a little bit about using AI sometimes to help you in the editing.
Mhm.
Um, Anything for you in your grant writing journey? Have there been any tools or resources that have been really important or helpful for you?
Because I'm a creative thinker.
I wish we all had your brain.
Those classes at the Visual Arts Center where I get to write creatively to balance out all the grant writing are my biggest help. And then, my boss being flexible with the way that I need to work because I work in spurts. And sometimes I'll just need to go drive and look at something because my brain is like, whoa.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just now starting to experiment with AI because I was like, well, that's cheating. And then I was like, well, what is it?
At least let me know what it is. Let me look into it.
Yeah, my boss was like, "Do you want a subscription to ChatGPT?" I was like, "I don't even use it. What are you using it for?" Um, so I have like started using it to like edit things and just get different ideas of how to word things differently. It's been more helpful than the online thesaurus.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
I love it. I don't see any questions. I'll give folks a couple seconds unless they if they've changed their minds, but I don't see any in the chat. So I'll ask you any kind of words of wisdom or last tips that you have for someone right now that is either looking for grants or maybe in the grant writing process. Any final departing words?
Um, so make a fund development plan annually, and then we use Asana for project management. So I built out a grants calendar in Asana where my whole team can see these are the grants I plan on applying for the year. If you have anything to add, they can go in and add it to the projects. The deadlines are in there, like everyone can see everything that I'm working on. So I think that's great if maybe you have a development team. Um, Definitely use social media.
Yes.
You've got to tell your story. I landed with a group of rock stars, but nobody would ever know because they weren't telling their story. So,
Yeah.
and then, in our community, we're known as the leader for affordable housing policy. So I'm like, okay, if we're the leaders, we got to tell our story. Nobody's going to know that you're a rock star if you don't tell about it. So
Yeah.
I've really been working on our marketing. Newsletters are so important. I can only afford to do one like quarterly, but if you have the time to do one monthly and you don't want to spam your constituents, so we only send out emails, if it's something important to announce or if it's our newsletter or things like that. People don't want to receive like an abundance of emails from you.
I love that. Amazing tips. Well, Kathryn, thank you so much for joining me. Oh, somebody asked about Asana. Let me write that up there for you all so that you can see it. And Asana is a project management software. And if you are with a nonprofit, I do believe they give a nonprofit rate or a nonprofit discount that you can apply for. So, yes, it is a great project management tool that you can use to not just for grants, but really anything. You can use it for fundraising, you can use it to manage emails that go out, you can use it for board development if you're tracking board meetings. I mean, really any type of project or task that you want to manage and keep track of. Asana is a great program to use for that. So highly recommend it. I use it both in my business, and I used it heavily in my executive director journey, especially when I didn't have an admin person. And it was a phenomenal tool to have. So thank you for reminding us of that.
Yeah.
Well, it has been a pleasure chatting with you, Kathryn. Thank you for joining us, for sharing those tips. We appreciate it. And thank you for all the great work that you do in our community.
Thank you, Tamara. It was great to speak with you, and I wish everyone good luck with their grant applications.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
All right, y'all. That wraps up our Thursday night conversation around grants. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. And as a reminder, Kathryn hit on some really key points. She talked about the importance of reading the instructions. I've seen so many grants get denied because people skip over specific information. They, the grant says don't make the application longer than a certain number of words or a certain number of pages, and they go over about 10 words or a half of a page. And you all may not know it, but a lot of times that disqualifies your grant up front. They are looking for reasons, especially if it's a larger grant. They're looking for people who don't read directions so they can automatically kind of weed you out and push you to the side. So I always encourage people, before you even jump into a grant, read the instructions. We can get really excited and think this is perfect. The mission lines up. The amount is exactly what we need. I think it'll be great. And then we jump into the application without actually fully reading it. So she gave us a great reminder that you have to read the application. She also gave us a reminder that sometimes you got to pull back. And if they say, do not send us a grant application or don't send us a request for funding, we don't take unsolicited requests. You want to respect that, because for some organizations, you can kind of ban yourself, kind of blackball yourself from ever being funded if you solicit someone who is telling you not to. A great way around that, as she also highlighted, is to make sure you're building relationships. So for some of these unsolicited grant opportunities, the way to get an opportunity to apply is to know people on the board, know people within the organization, build those relationships so you can get invited to apply. And then I think the key here also is to diversify that funding. You've probably read all the headlines with the federal funding back and forth. Some things are being restricted. Other things have been restricted. Now they're bringing them back. It's all over the place. And it is very important as a nonprofit leader that you have diversity in your funding. Everything shouldn't be grants, but everything shouldn't be all individuals. Everything shouldn't be corporate. Really sit down and look at where all your money is coming from and figure out how to create some balance across all those sources. So it was a great conversation. If you enjoyed this, I invite you to share it. It will remain on my LinkedIn as well as my YouTube channel. So you can feel free to share it with a friend who may find this information helpful. As a reminder, please go ahead and order a copy of my book, Leading for Good. It officially releases this Saturday. You can head to goleadforgood.com and order your copy. I do cover both storytelling for grants and donor relationships, as well as the importance of diversity and funding in the book. So all of the conversations you heard leading up until today, in some way, all of those topics are highlighted in the book. Tomorrow, I will be going live with an expert around data. So she's going to be sharing with us about how to use data to increase funding. I know y'all need money. And so I'm trying to have the conversations that put more money in your pockets of the organization and allow you all to do the mission. And so tomorrow, as we wrap up the week, we will talk with her about data. And that conversation will be at noon. I want to give y'all your Friday nights to enjoy. So we won't be live tomorrow night. We will be live here, same space you're tuning in from, at noon Eastern Standard Time. So feel free to join me there. Totally looking forward to this conversation. Order a copy of the book. Thank you for joining me here live this evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Take care.